Good evening. Welcome to HOD Live. This is a podcast that is filmed and produced here at the House of Deliverance Church. My name is Eric Battle. I'm the pastor of the House of Deliverance Church. And tonight we have a very special guest, Dr. Mabry. And our discussion tonight centers on the idea that racism is in fact a public health crisis. Before we get into the heart of this matter and deal with the idea that being a person of color can impact your access to health care and also your ability to be well, I'd like to take this opportunity to allow Dr. Mabry just kind of introduce yourself, tell us about your background, kind of your medical pedigree and things of that nature.
Hello. My background is starts with, I guess, the name Herman James Mabry III. I'm from Houston and live in Houston. My mother told me when I was in high school that I would be a doctor. So as far as what my career direction was going to be, that was cleared up early.
Already decided. Sounds kind of like me.
So I graduated from Cashmere Gardens High School in Houston and went to Howard University. There was only one occasion when I was at Howard that I considered if I wanted to do something different, and I cleared that up in about 3 minutes that I would just do what my mother said.
Right.
I went from there to Meharry Medical College, and from there I went to Baylor affiliated colleges, and ultimately turns out I'm the first African American ever accepted by Baylor into their ENT program, and I graduated in 1978.
Wow. So, and Howard, you mentioned that you were considering doing something different. What were you considering doing at Howard?
Well, at that point, I was roughly about 17 years old.
Okay.
So I was young. I was younger than everybody in my class, which meant I was younger than the majority of people at Howard. And we had a class of 7. We started in Houston on the train, and my parents never saw Howard until I actually graduated.
Wow.
So I was on a train for the first time by myself. And each stop along the way, the first stop being Little Rock, Arkansas, some black kid got on the train, and the car filled up accordingly.
Wow.
We got to St. Louis, and at St. Louis, we actually changed trains, and it turned out then there were 2 cars of black kids going to Howard.
Wow.
St. Louis was the hub by which things happened. What happened at that point then was we were with 7 kids from Houston, and one was from a school, Worthing, one was from, 3 were from Jack Yates High School, and 5 were from Cashmere High School. There were 5 black high schools in Houston at the time, and those are the 9 going to Howard. The track record at Howard was that people would go, but everybody wouldn't graduate. So with that in mind, I was sitting on the steps. One of the people from Jack Yates was going into architecture school. He was coming back, and he was having to make the little things that hang from the ceiling that float around in the air, and mobiles, I think it's called. He was having to do that with cans. Someone else was going into law, and then they had to learn a lot of, papers and words and things like that. And anyway, in a very simplistic way, at 17, I was sitting on the steps overlooking what's called a quadrangle, where all of this was going on. It's amazing at Howard still. But I was sitting there and thinking about maybe I wanted to do something different that other than what my mother had directed me was going to happen. And I thought, well, I really didn't want to do the mobile thing and try to be creative that way. I really didn't want to go to law school and have to learn all of those books. Of course, when you go to medical school, there's a lot of books you have to learn.
Exactly, I was going to say.
And I thought about a plumber, and I said, well, I just didn't really want to constantly be cleaning my hands. But when you're a surgeon, you're constantly cleaning your hands.
Exactly.
Nonetheless, I put everything away and said, no, I'll simply do what my mother said. I was actually accepted to St. Louis University Medical School. And that was a big thing because one of my family members had gone to St. Louis University and graduated, and he was a general surgeon in Houston. I was also accepted to Meharry, and I was accepted to Howard. Well, I had been at Howard for 4 years, and therefore I thought that I would do a different location. I had seen snow, actually, first time.
Really?
And
Wow,
Howard, they had a blizzard 2 of the years I was there. So I was excited, and I initially accepted St. Louis. St. Louis at that time, which would have been 1969, St. Louis was about $23,000 for the first year. Then you also had to pay for room and board,
Wow, okay.
and you had to purchase what's called a bone box, which is all of the bones that you had to learn all about.
Your actual bones, human bones.
Right.
Okay,
You had to
wow.
learn each part of that anatomically. Meharry was $8,000, and it included room and board.
That's a big difference.
And I thought, why would I put my parents through that extra expense?
Right.
And so I chose Meharry for that reason. It didn't require a bone box,
Okay.
but the microscope was gifted to me by one of the physicians in Houston who had been to Meharry. And so the Meharry experience actually, for me, was a good one, was a
Good.
great one. And I enjoyed it from that perspective. That's how I ended up where I ended up.
Let me ask you this question, and just out of curiosity, you said your mother, early in your life, said you were going to be a doctor. Do you think her motive for saying that was because she wanted you to succeed in a profession that is widely known as being someone of importance within any community? Or do you think she saw something in you in terms of your math and science ability to where she said that because you're good at these subjects, you would make a good doctor? What do you think her motivation was in saying that you would be a doctor?
Motivation, some questions children didn't ask in those days. And so my mind didn't think that way in those days as to ask my mother questions.
Right.
My mother always made me feel special, and my mother always told me I was special. I was the firstborn, and I was good in math, and I did make a lot of A's. I was the number 2 in a class of 232.
Wow.
I went to Howard on a full scholarship. Separate from that, I had a scholarship from a local philanthropic called the Worthing Scholarship. And I was one of 10 National Achievement Honor students that they had. That was the first year that it was created. So with all of that in mind, the thought was that I could do whatever it is that I chose to do. But basically, as far as being a doctor has, I guess, in our community, always been a big deal.
Absolutely.
My mother was a teacher. My father invariably ended up being a teacher, although his degree was in automotive engineering because my grandfather owned an automotive shop, automotive repair shop in Oklahoma. And my father started with that, but when he got to Houston, he had different thoughts. And therefore, he went back to school and got the degree and the master's so that he could become a teacher. And from there, he ended up being an assistant principal at a school before he retired.
You know, it's funny that nowadays, if you talk to a lot of child psychologists, guidance counselors, parents, young people, there seems to be this idea that, you know, parents and people that are bringing up children should allow them to decide the direction and course of their life. And I understand that. I see the value in that, and I get that. But I think from hearing about your experience, we lose a lot in not listening to our parents, our caregivers, people, grandparents that know us in helping to shape our future. And nowadays, you know, it would be unheard of for someone to say that early on, this is what my mother said and my father said, and I saw the value in that, and I accepted that, and I'm therefore living a good, valuable, productive life. It's a shame that, especially within our community, we don't necessarily value the wisdom of people that know us. And I think a lot of times we end up finding out things and when wasting years of our life trying to discover things that other people that gave birth to us or trained us already saw in us.
I would agree with you. I know that, well, for me, having my mother and my father as my life imagery, I was proud of my dad. My dad was what I would consider a man's man. Mm-hmm. My dad worked more than one job the entire time that I knew him, and my father was always about excellence.
Right.
My mother was also about excellence, and my mother was very clear that I was special, and made it clear to me that I was special.
That's important.
So I always believed her, and it became without a question. I was talking with your father about being firstborn, and so it really doesn't matter a lot of chatter that I would hear from anyone else, because I had already been given the clarity that I was special.
Right.
So when it came to medical school, I think that it was because of the fact that both my parents in different ways had made me feel that succeeding was never the issue. It was simply what did I wish to succeed in.
What did you succeed in? That's powerful. You know, I kind of can relate to this whole idea of this prophetic pronouncement in terms of what you will be, because as a young person, I heard from my father, you're going to be a preacher, you're going to be a pastor. And, you know, nowadays, again, were you to say that to a young person, there would be this kind of pushback. But it's funny, if you look at other communities, the Jewish community, the Asian community, they very much follow in step with the family business, or they give value to the wishes of their parents and grandparents. And there's a lot of success in these communities. And so I think that putting a premium on people that raised us and know us as giving direction to our life is not only valuable, but it can save a young person from a lot of needless wandering and finding themselves. So that part of your story, I think, is instructive by itself.
Well, it directly helped me. Definitely, it helped me, given the assistance of knowing if ever I had a question, something that I was not exactly certain about, I would always rely on the wisdom of whatever my parents had thought as being their thoughts were probably a lot closer to being correct than my unknowing.
Right. Well, I want to get into the issue at hand, racism, public health crisis. I want to read to you a few facts within the medical field. And I call them facts, and me not being a doctor, I don't know if they're true or not, but they're out there. But these three items, I think, speak to the issue at hand. And it deals with the fact, I was listening to a lecture given by a black doctor, and he wrote a book, and the name of the book escapes me, but he made a claim in the book that being black is bad for one's health. And what he meant by that is that racism causes and contributes to not only a lower life expectancy, but also to health problems. And he said this based upon, and he gave three examples to kind of drive home this point. One example he gave was the algorithms and biased data when it comes to medical testing. And he mentioned that in a certain test that tests for kidney functions, that within the data of the test, they have it calculated that blacks have more muscle mass than whites. And that data point being ingrained in the data, he says, it affects when black people are referred for transplants. It affects us being referred to dialysis, what medication we're prescribed, and also delays in care. He also mentioned the fact that the pulse oximeter, and I hope I'm saying that right, but the thing that measures your oxygen in your blood. He says that when this piece of equipment was invented, black people or people with melanin or darker skin tones were not included in the original testing. And so he says that it typically with black patients or people with darker pigment, the test or this pulse oximeter doesn't necessarily measure adequately the oxygen in one's blood. And so it can cause a situation where there is lower oxygen to appear to be higher oxygen. He said the same thing about the little infrared thermometers that we used during COVID, that because of pigment issues, they're not accurate. Is there within the medical infrastructure, healthcare infrastructure, how big of a deal are these things that, testing and medicine and the delivery of healthcare, how much does race impact the delivery of healthcare?
The points that you mentioned require actual investigation. And so I won't really comment on that because what I would say to you is that that's that person's opinion.
Okay.
But medicine is such that whatever the doctors, there's no longer black and white now. Now you have Asian and Indian,
right.
and you have many different factors by which all of the people want to be treated a same way or will not allow for anyone to knowingly mistreat them. Me Too movement has magnified many eyes. And so the healthcare industry as a sort, if what that particular doctor is saying were accurate, people would not knowingly agree to that. They would require a mandate that they check into it and if it's correct, because those type things would, I keep pointing my finger because pulse oximeters, like when you go to surgery, they put a little clip on your finger, and that's the pulse oximeter. And so basically, as important as it is, anesthesiologists, they don't want to be misinformed and lose the patient. And you go down the list, as important as it is, I don't think that is something that any of us would knowingly allow to be okay because of race or any other reason. Primarily because of not wanting to be sued. You wouldn't want that to be accurate if indeed. Now, that's not to say his studies aren't whatever they happen to be, but studies are many times wanting to show a certain reflection. My thought about racism in medicine is different. When I was doing my training as the first black ENT resident in Baylor, our first day of training, we entered into a cafeteria at the county. And I was looking around. There were 500 people there that day. And this was 1973. And as we looked around, at least as I looked around, I found one other head looking around, and we found each other. There were 200 interns for surgery and 300 interns for medicine. There was one of each. I was the one for medicine, and he was the one. 5 years later, our paths had crossed again, and I had completed 2 years of surgery and 3 years of ear, nose, and throat training. He had completed 3 years of medical training and 2 years of pulmonary medicine training. And we both had graduated, we were graduating, and then we saw each other, yet we had made it. But that first year, being the first black, I was also the only black. And so if I were a minute late to a lecture, it was an issue. Everyone turned around. The things that struck me were, other than the fact that truly, sometimes we lose track of the terms that we're a minority. Minority means it's not as many of us as they are of others. So maybe it's no longer black and white, it's Asian and Caucasian and Indian and Pakistani, but we're still the minority of the minorities. And that being the case, I was looking around, and that's a meaningful experience to know that you're the only one.
Yeah. You have a lot on your shoulders.
Intimidating.
Yeah.
And so what helped me was actually the majority of the clerks and at least half of the nurses were the same minority as me.
Right.
And they helped.
You found some kinship.
They helped.
Yeah.
Well, I don't. No, they lifted me up. I didn't.
Good.
I
Okay.
didn't find them. They
Yeah.
lifted me
Right.
up because they had not seen someone like me there, and they were proud.
Right.
And it's knowing their pride. It also helped me to push myself.
Let me ask you about this. Anecdotally, at least, there seems to be a commonly reported phenomenon where patients of color, and I think you're right in not necessarily identifying race or skin color as a culprit, because a lot of times it's economic, right? But we can't deny race also. Patients of color will report that their symptom management, especially when it comes to pain medication, things like that, is a lot different. And you hear of reports, and again, not knowing how true they are or not, that patients of color are prescribed or painkillers are given with more care than with other patients because of the fact that there is this assumption of drug-seeking behavior among people of color. Do you think that systemic racism impacts care at the practitioner level?
I would agree with you that it does, in my belief, but I would not state it based on the example that you gave. I think that there is skepticism of minorities.
Right.
What I was trying to speak to earlier was that during my initial training, when we would have the clinics, and there would be 80-year-old grandmother, great-grandmother enter the clinic, and the other residents would refer to them by their first name.
Wow.
They would, in talking, refer to them as girl. I was observing and quiet because I was the newbie. But this was pretty much perpetuated, and it was as it was okay. And I'm thinking how disrespectful that is and was. Well, those residents that I had, those interns that I had, those professors that I had, which now this is 2023, and some of those professors are no longer here.
Right.
But the residents are now the professors. And that thinking stayed with them and stays with them, and that's what perpetuates the racism, is because they don't perceive it as racist. That's simply how they look at things, and that's simply how they treat us.
Right.
And I still say us. And they are pretty much in charge of the different health units and so forth. You may have a black or two here or there, but we're not. Of the 12 people, that's one of us sitting at the table, and we're not ultimately the only one in charge. If you have one of us that has stayed in and around long enough that we're the president, but you have all of the people, there's another structure that oversees them.
Right.
It's inherent because where the power is where the majority is. A friend of mine who was in that Howard group that became a doctor too. The first three boys that graduated from Kashmir all went to Howard, and they all became doctors. Different ways. One went through the Air Force, one went through a northern school, and me, I went to a southern school, but they became doctors. Well, one of those is a very, very fine doctor, someone who I refer my family to, et cetera, so forth. As opposed to, I'm what you call an independent doctor, which I think that the system is pretty much pushing out independent doctors of whatever color. But he became a member of one of the what they call organizations, sort of like called Health Springs. Health Springs, I believe, was taken over by something bigger like Cigna.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's been in that organization for many years. Let's just throw out a number, say 15. And he's risen through the ranks. But when the opportunity came to put him in a position of power, it was given to someone that had only recently joined the operation.
Wow.
Now, he and I don't talk a lot about it, but I felt badly for him that he was overlooked by someone much younger of the other race. And so, in my mind, I'm clear, it hasn't changed. I simply chose a different path whereby I simply have always thought that if you're on a ship and the ship is sinking, somehow or another rats always survive.
Right.
Rats, roaches, they just make it somehow on a piece of wood or something floating in the water. And I've always had the thought that if there's a way by which that rat is going to survive, I'm going to survive.
Right.
I've always felt that God gives us our intelligence, our thinking process, how we go about doing things, and what he wants from us is for us to truly apply all of our gifts.
Right.
So we're constantly given impossible tasks, and it's really not 100% impossible, but we have to, in a Sudoku kind of way, find our way to figure out that particular puzzle to receive the next blessing.
Right.
Or to show appreciation for the blessing we've already got.
Absolutely. Back when Barack Obama became the first black president, there was a lot of talk that America had overcome the racist problem, or race was no longer, we were in a post-race society. One of the things, though, that the representation of blacks, be it in the White House or Congress or Supreme Court, business overlooks is that racism in its worst form is always institutional. And you have institutions, be it, whether they're doing it willingly or it's just tradition, that carry racism along. And it's within every institution, within business, within the academic institution, and with healthcare. And some of that deals with the access to healthcare by people of color and by people of lower economic status. How much of what is happening within the healthcare of people of color is impacted by this institutional racism, or denying access to healthcare, or denying access to some of the best doctors because we lack the insurance to go see some of these best doctors?
Well, that's a tough one. I'm here speaking with you, but for the most part, I keep my thoughts to myself about topics like this. In my mind, Barack Obama, for me as a black person, was a source of pride. That there's a statement we have from Texas: one of the crabs made it out of the barrel. And so it was a source of pride that as a black person that he won, and that he had an educated woman, wife by his side, and it was just exciting to see a black family, as it were. But for the most part, from my perspective, I really didn't see a lot that Barack Obama did for black people.
Yeah, that's true.
I definitely didn't see much at all that he did for medicine.
Right. Okay.
I was part of a group of doctors who actually put together money to save a community hospital in our area, and ultimately, therefore, we became what's called a doctor-owned hospital. Barack Obama's timeline basically put out petitions and implementation that made it hard for doctor-owned hospitals to survive. He is supposed to helping them.
Right.
They actually hurt them.
Wow.
Because I pretty much don't choose to get into the political ring, I never really understood the big deal about bathrooms.
Wow.
Because there was a conversation about bathrooms, and it was like, I didn't completely understand it, but it was Barack Obama pretty much in my mind that opened up this whole transgender issue. Because the word didn't come out, only the word bathroom was being talked about. But from that bathroom, it was a lot more involved.
Yeah.
And that was through him.
You know, that's a very insightful point, because and I know that there were things that caused any president to limit what they can do, because the president is just one, the executive branch is just one branch in the federal government, not to mention, the state and local level. But there are many observers who will say that during that presidency, the LGBTQ community seemed to advance at a greater rate than the African American community. And the attention really was paid to, and in fact, they define themselves as a minority, which I think qualitatively, there's a big difference between your sexual orientation versus race. Whereas, and I hear and I think it's true that, if three people walk into the room and one person is a homosexual or whatever the label is, people may not know that. But if a black man or black woman were to walk in the room, that's automatically apparent. So I think that's a very keen observation, and I think sometimes expectation that we have put on politicians in the Democratic Party, Republican Party, whatever, that they would somehow be the supermen and superwomen that would come in and save our communities and fix this and fix that, I think is kind of short-sighted. But let me ask you this question. One thing Barack Obama did put through is Obamacare. Did Obamacare help create access or open access or kind of help with this racial disparity within medicine?
Obamacare has done the thing of mandating insurance be held by everybody. Now, everybody still doesn't have insurance. Many patients that I see in my practice don't have insurance. But the people that have Obamacare, however it's set up, for the most part, they have insurance, but their deductible is $8,000, $9,000, $12,000.
Wow.
So they have insurance, but even though they have cancer, or we think they have cancer, we can't biopsy them and use their insurance until they first pay the $8,000, $12,000 deductible. So it's a joke. I mean, it's a very bad joke that yes, they have insurance, but they can't use it until they ante up more than they have access to. So somehow or another, it's impossible for me to believe that they don't know that whomever that they are that's in control. But that's the thing about it, is that yes, Obamacare exists, but the deductions are almost across the board so high that they can't use it.
Who then is helped by it? Would the middle class person who, for whatever reason, doesn't have health care, are they the people that gain the most out of Obamacare? I mean, who is the Obamacare? Who gains the most out of Obamacare?
You're asking again. I qualify the fact that these are conversations I don't choose to have because I'm ear, nose, and throat. So the majority of the people, when we're talking majority, wouldn't be ear, nose, and throat. We're a specialty item, and our patients are not as many as the majority of people with your high blood pressure, your diabetes, heart troubles, etc. So when you have insurance and you have an emergency, you have to be admitted, and therefore
whether you have insurance or not.
Exactly, and therefore your Obamacare kicks in because you had to bypass the deductible.
Right.
And it's the people who are fortunate enough to have the deductible, and then all of their savings have to be put together to pay that first, and then mother can go to the hospital. Are the people, as I said, who are ill enough such that you have a heart issue
Yeah.
and it stops you, and therefore you have to go to the emergency
Right.
room. All emergency rooms across the country have to see you.
Wow.
That's that. But then once they see you and your illness is terrible enough, they can't knowingly let you out of the
Right.
door. They are forced to put you and keep you in the hospital.
Yeah.
And therefore, Obamacare does help those people, but mostly it helps those hospitals get paid.
Wow. That's pretty interesting. Let me ask you a question. In a lot of the industrialized countries in the West, Canada, the UK, there is a single payer healthcare system. Is that something that you think would be a good thing for America to have, where for everyone access to healthcare is automatic? Do you think it would be a bad thing? What are your thoughts on really instituting a healthcare system for everyone?
Again, I don't really get into it. What I have looked into or listened to or heard of is that people who have healthcare set up in the way in which you spoke to, the problem is access to getting there. The appointment schedule is that you have a problem, but you literally have to wait
Right.
weeks to sometimes on occasion months to be seen. So yes, it'll be covered when you get there, but there's so much pain and
Why
before
is
ever
that?
getting
Why
there.
is it such a hard time getting appointments?
Because there are only so many doctors.
Is there a shortage?
In general, as I read and understand, there's a shortage of doctors across the world, as it were. And so in these systems, basically, it takes them a while to be seen. That's the downside of the problem, is that, yes, once you get there, they'll take care of things, but you got to wait an innate amount of time before you actually get there in general. You have your Kaiser Permanente like things in Houston, not in Houston, but in California, and my uncle had that, and that was they took care of him. They took care of replacement of his knees and this, that, and the other. However, it was heavily layered as far as people making the final decisions, but ultimately it would take him weeks for his appointment. And he would have to, again, go through an emergency setup to actually be seen, but not by his doctor, by whomever was taking care of emergencies that day. The healthcare has changed so much, and it's changing further, because in the beginning it was, you do a good job, people appreciate you, they don't have any money, they give you some eggs. It started changing to where you could see someone today, but because their family was in a different plan, the family, they couldn't see you. They couldn't refer them to you. And then the plan started changing on another level to where you could see someone today, but they couldn't even come to see you for follow-up because you weren't in that plan, and the month is now the beginning of a different month, and now that it's a different plan. It's changing, and it's changed yet again, because now the independent doctors are being sort of squeezed out. You have to go through a whole level to get paid using insurances. You have to use people to give the right codes. You then have to use other people who have the instrumentation to do the right level of billing. And those people, some of those are getting harder and harder to find. If you can't find them, then manually you're having to, in calling them, you're on the phone so long just
Right.
waiting, just so you can get the insurance company to tell you that, yes, that patient is one of ours. And then so therefore your staff, you have to have staff to be able to go with you to see the patient, but also a different staff to be on the phone to verify that the next patient can even be seen. All of the costs of therefore paying staff is going up. You have California passing a law of $20 an hour to work at one of the fast food restaurants. $20, that's a lot of money for someone who they just woke up, but they actually didn't actually go to any school, any college, anything, but $20. And with someone you have to pay health care.
Right.
You have to pay the taxes, the Social Security. You have to pay all of that. So their $20 may be $20, but their paycheck includes
Right.
more money than that.
Right.
So many small businesses are having to not exist because you don't have the mom pop scenario where they have a bunch of kids who are all working in the
Right.
store with them, helping them out. So the money thing, I'm just watching. People talk about many things. They talk about end of days. They talk about things happening, and we're getting close to us not being here. Is time for another Noah moment. We talk about things. We talk about what's going on in the China thing. We talk about recently you found out that China has bought all this land next to our bases and so
Right.
forth in America. And everything, North Korea and South Korea have toned down. The imagery has been torn down. That they were trying to come together and make peace. And in my mind, we are headed in a direction because you can't keep going up.
It's unsustainable.
That's the word.
Yeah.
Unsustainable.
It's funny you mentioned that. Speaking of, you're from Texas, your state of Texas, your governor is in the news. He has claimed that Texas is being invaded by people coming in from the South. And therefore, he has access or the ability to bypass certain federal laws and handle this situation on his own. And several red states have come in support of him. There certainly seems to be something brewing in America today in terms of you're seeing the beginnings of a major fracture within people, within dividing on politics, race, economics. And the unfortunate thing is that the people when things go wrong, the people who are hurt the most are poor people, people of color. And another aspect of this whole thing about race and public health and it being a crisis, many are suggesting that mental health and all of these problems and racism, and people are at that point where they seem as though they're ready to snap. What impact does racism and just everyday racism in society have on one's mental and emotional health and their ability to heal?
My perspective, again, is from a different area. Texas is quite large. I'm involved with a funeral home in Texas. And when we go on services, we're leaving the actual Houston location and we're going out and we're passing ranches and we see signs that obviously are for, they're not democratic.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is simply that this is where the majority lives. And these are the people who are the farmers and the ranchers and their thoughts at some point have to be heard also.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, a mother and her children died crossing the Rio Grande to try to get into Texas. Mm-hmm. And the president wanted to state it was Governor Abbott's fault mm-hmm. for putting the razor wire up and other things like that. Now the truth has come out that actually the person died. It was on the Mexico side, and the Mexican president took care of it. The fault, I don't think, was with our governor. The fault was with the lady trying to illegally come into Texas or any other part of the United States. So, somehow or another, the people with the loud voices overlook the basic premise that there's still right and wrong. There are still laws, and there are ways that people can come into Texas legally. But it's trying to be the press and everyone talking, not everyone, but the people that are talking along with our president are trying to completely ignore and not mention the fact that we're talking about people in mass trying to do an illegal process. So Texas is always been different from any other state because we were our own country. And we chose to join, unite with the rest of the United States. But we do believe that we are special.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you guys do.
There's that word again.
I think some of the critics would push back and say that, and we're dealing with this whole issue of institutional racism, that within immigration, there seems to be a bias towards people who are coming in. And let's deal with even crisis, immigration, and folks that are coming in because of a national disaster, war-torn areas, things of that nature. Back, I think it was 2000, maybe 9, there was a huge earthquake in Haiti, and I could be wrong with the year. But from initial reports, there were a lot of issues with Haitian refugees being able to access or come over to the United States and flee from either the devastation or in some cases war-torn areas. And however, other nations, European nations, during the latest crisis in the war in the Ukraine, even in Canada, immigration, that there seems to be a double standard when it comes to people of color accessing the immigration process versus Europeans taking advantage of the immigration process. And so it seems like there's a further divide within trying to decipher, is this because of the numbers and the data, and this is why this immigration of this group is different and why our policies are what they are as relates to this group? Is it the data? Is the numbers? Or is there bias? And I think, one of the things that doesn't help is when certain politicians will color the issue and say things that give people that pause to say, well, it seems to be just racism or it seems to be bias. And sometimes they're clumsy statements or clumsy rhetoric, and sometimes it's not the politicians, sometimes it's the people in the street, seem to take an issue that maybe there are data points that can, show why certain things are the way they are, and it reduces it down to the same old bias that we're used to seeing take place year after year. I mean, how would you respond to that?
Not directly.
Mm-hmm.
However, in general, we don't want people coming over from anywhere illegally, and that's the original bottom line. I don't remember specifically what happened when there was some bad photo ops when the Haitians did what they did. It was 9,000 or more. That's a lot of people. But there was some bad photo ops with some of the rangers on horses and things like that.
I remember that.
And then when they actually got into it, there was an explanation that made reasonable sense as to why it happened. But to look at it and see it in a moment's time, you came away thinking, oh, how unfair. But at this point, since everyone not everyone, but between Central America, South America, Mexico, all of that southern, but they're all technically were minorities over here. So yes, you'll say that, but because that's where so many now people are coming from, then those are the people that the appearance is that we have a problem with minorities. When really the only problem is simply that these are all people trying to come in and succeeding, coming in illegally. I mean, as was pointed out to me recently by my wife, we wanted to get on the plane to go across the border, but we had to show that we had had our shots, that we had had our COVID shots. None of these people are being shown that they have any kind of shots. And so that is the issue, that people are making an issue by trying to go around the issue. And the issue is the illegality of coming in this particular way that they are choosing. So the fact that the governor is putting up
fences and
well,
walls.
no, trailers, those trailer trucks,
Oh, okay.
the big metal on top of each other on some parts of it. The fact he's putting up the trailer wire and the other things, the statement is the same. It's not that we don't want you. We don't want you coming in this way. Come in over there where we have the gate, where we have the people to talk to you. Come in legally. That's really what it is about. Everything else is simply confusion.
And I think that for certain people, yourself included, that's what it amounts to. I think the problem is that for a lot of people, it does come down to race, and it does come down to, we don't want these people in our country. You know, there's obviously, I mean, your education was in historically black college youth, so you know the whole issue of around the 60s, 70s, critical race theory coming on the scene. And critical race theory, as that, for the viewers who may not are familiar with that, but the perspective that says that every institution and social movement here in America, race plays a role in the development of that institution, of that social movement. And race is at the center and has been at the center of who we are as a country since its inception. And the idea that in these institutions, healthcare, immigration, policing, housing, redlining, all of these different things, that race is always going to be a part of it. And then I think that sometimes, unless people are given, you know, a adequate, sensible explanation as to why certain policies are what they are, then they will conclude that the reason I'm being denied access either to immigration, to health care, to the best doctors, to a loan from a bank to buy a house, has to do with race. And it seems as though in a period of the time in this country, we had an ability to maybe change the narrative and rehabilitate the narrative. But since then, it seems to have fallen back. And today, 2024, racism is and the racial divide, I think, is as deep as it's ever been. And so a lot of people don't trust the institutions of America, educational, healthcare, prison, and they go into it expecting bias.
Again, I would agree with you, and I do agree with you. And for that perspective that I know, it is true. The problem is, unfortunately for me, one is because I'm not the right person to talk to. The thing is simply that you have Nikki Haley running for president. But my understanding is from the snippets I've heard, she says that America is not inherently racist. Well, then you have Whoopi Goldberg on The View asking the question, well, who was it lynching black people? Because black people didn't lynch themselves. Right. And so when you have the people that's wanting to get your vote, not acknowledging the obvious, right. I was so disrupted when Ketanji Brown Jackson, our first black female on the Supreme Court, said she didn't know what a woman was. How can you not know what a woman was? We all had a mother.
Right.
How can you not know what a woman is? So my question is, what happened to XX is a woman and XY is a man? I mean, that's, to me, scientific. It's what back during the Olympics they used to use to against what Russian women and things like that. What happened to that?
Right, and not to mention someone with a full beard, manly build, that's a man.
And you have, but this is a XXXY. It's your DNA. You can't alter that. You can't change that. And so I'm simply, when President Obama was president, President Obama wanted to build a wall. President Obama was a Democrat. But at the time, the Republicans did not back him in building a wall. Okay, after 8 years, President Obama's not there. President Trump wants to build a wall. Now, those same Democrats don't want to build a wall. President Trump is not there, and President Biden is a Democrat, like President Obama. President Obama's vice president. But President Biden doesn't want to build a wall. I'm confused. How could it be right when President Obama wanted to do it, not right now? And so how can you have all of these people, all of the numbers, whatever they are, because they've shown Chinese people, they've shown terrorists from Iran and so forth, that's from the watch list. They've shown a number of people have come through. Mm-hmm. It's not about racism. It's about not understanding how can this be okay that this many people and the president says that the border is controlled. It's the disbelief and what's making everything worse, that you just don't trust anybody because we still believe what we can see. You know, there is some Thomas in all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in fact, you guys are the show me state, right?
That's right.
Okay. So I'm just saying, this is to me what I perceive as a problem, because I've never really been much about the politics stuff. I voted for people who were Democrat. I voted for people who were Republican. I mean, maybe I'm an independent. But the point is simply that it's never been the issue that it's become.
It's gotten,
and it is,
right.
And it's not going away.
No, it's not.
And now it's about really, truly the money. Mm-hmm. People can't afford any of this. It's the internet. Because the internet and social media made it possible for us to actually see what bling looks like. We may have heard about it on when we were growing up, but we never thought that way. I was today, I'm out of town, so I was somewhere getting something to eat for breakfast. Mm-hmm. There was a mother, a father, and 2 kids getting breakfast. Mm. I never ate out when I was in school. Mm-hmm. This is a school day. Mm. So things have changed to a point that my observation is going to be, we're going to have another Noah moment. We gotta do like a foreclosure and just start this whole thing over, because that's what they seem to do to the world. Right. Is that my neighbors that I had couldn't afford all the debt they were in.
Right. You know, and this is very salient point. I think America, the way it's going, is that access to certain things is becoming reserved for a certain class of people. And be it higher education, which, like you said in the beginning, $23,000 in 1970. What was it when you were going to go to SLU?
Right,
1979.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, 1973.
73. That 29. That's a lot today. 23,000. But to deal with access to higher education, healthcare, certain things, America. The model we're at right now is not sustainable. And so I think, and something you said earlier is absolutely true. You know, if there ever was a time we needed God and divine help, that time is right now. Because without God helping us and healing us, and sometimes he can heal us even without the doctors, then we're going to be in bad shape, because where we are today as a country is scary. And even the conversation we're having, you're finding a lot of people that cannot have civil conversations about these issues and without it erupting into violence and name, and they can't disagree. And so even the art of conversation has been lost.
Correct.
I really appreciate your insight and you being on the podcast. And we got into a lot of different subjects, but it was very good. I thank you for your insight. I thank you for your service to the community. I thank you for being who you are and helping people. And my prayer for you is many continued years of success, health, and strength. I thank you for listening to HOD Live Podcast. Please like and share. And as always, stay tuned next week for another wonderful episode of HOD Live. Great.